Bonsoir French 101 students, comment allez-vous? Ça va? So as you can see in today's or this evening's video, we've moved beyond looking at the culture point, which was about la Côte d'Azur, and now we're moving on to looking at compétence 1, which is all about identifying and describing people. And so we'll start with this page from the e-textbook, which would be la page 34. So getting used to those numbers. The other thing that you will notice in this page of the textbook is that they're giving you a little bit more content in French. And the more you get exposed to the language, the more you're going to get used to it, the more you're going to get to understand the rhythm of it and how it sounds and how it feels. And there's even this kind of famous language learning theory by a guy by the name of Stephen Krashen. He was sort of a famous theorist for English language learners, for people learning different languages. And his theory was called the I+1 theory, which means that you get input from a language, but if you get input that's just a little bit above what you already know, and it's not too much above what you already know, it helps you advance. So it's, I think, a really interesting theory because it sort of helps you understand that, yeah, you're not going to understand everything you hear in a new language. Some words might be unfamiliar. Sometimes people might speak a little bit quickly and you might not catch every word, but it's really okay. And it actually helps prime your brain to want to know more about that language. And the more you hear, the more you get exposed to it, the more comfortable you become. So if you see like this note culturelle over here on the left, just because it's written all in French doesn't mean it's something to be scared of. So we'll read through this first because I think this is also a very important cultural note for you as college students who are taking a language course. So the first sentence there says, Les études universitaires, which they tell you here is university studies, sont très importantes en France. Well, you can probably figure out that something is really important in France, right? So this verb sont just means is or are in this case. So university studies, going to college is really important in France. I think it's important here too, right? La majorité des universités sont des universités publiques. La majorité, I think you can guess, means majority, right? So there you can see so much similarity between English vocabulary and French vocabulary. We share so many words. Something like 50% of the vocabulary we have in English, we borrowed from French, like centuries ago. So this is another great reason to learn French or other Romance languages like Spanish or Italian and even Romanian or Portuguese, because they all have so many similarities and we have lots of really similar vocabulary. Okay, so the majority of universities are public universities. Lander is a public university, right? And lots of our universities across the United States are public, which means they get some of their funding from government, state governments. But I would say in France, they probably get a whole lot more than our universities do. Okay, généralement, easy to guess that, right? Generally. Il y a une université publique dans toutes les grandes villes. Il y a is a great expression to know for the rest of your life in French. It just means there is. So there's a public university in all the big cities in France. Grande, of course, means big or large. Et la majorité des étudiants vont à l'université dans la ville la plus proche de chez eux. Okay, so they've given you the translation for this here. So it just means that most students go to the university closest to where they live or closest to their home, which is really a big cultural difference between the United States and France. Most students probably live at home with their families and they just travel back and forth to their classes as if they were going to high school. So it's not a whole lot different. Most students probably aren't going to live in dorms. Maybe they stay with their family until they finish their degree and they go off on their own once they have a job. And I think that's the case in a lot of countries. I think the situation's a little bit different here in the United States, that we have the chance to live apart from our parents and to have a roommate and learn how all of that works. So I think it's just cultural. I think we emphasize a lot of independence and individualism in American culture. Maybe in other cultures there's a more maybe family-oriented or collective kind of feeling, and that's not across the board. Those are generalizations, but those could be some of the reasons. Okay, and finally, la situation est-elle semblable dans votre région? So is the situation similar? Does it resemble? You can kind of see the similarity in words there. Is the situation similar in your region? And as I just described, it probably is a little bit different here in the United States. Okay. Another thing I wanted to take a look at on this page would be notes de vocabulaire. Okay, so as it tells us there, we use c'est or ce sont to identify people and things with a noun. Okay, so the first sentence you see there is c'est David, ce sont mes amis. So c'est is referring to one person or thing. Ce sont is referring to multiple people or things. So c'est David, that's David. Ce sont mes amis, they're my friends. Where by contrast, il est, elle est, ils sont, or elles sont, you would use those expressions to describe people with adjectives. And they basically just mean he is, she is, they are, or they are. So il refers to he, elle to she, il with the S to lots of male people or a mixed group. Elle refers to just female. Okay, so as it tells you there, you will learn more about that later. And adjectives do have a different form depending on whether it's referring to a man or a woman, and we'll see those differences shortly. And remember not to include the French equivalent of the word a when stating someone's profession, nationality, or religion. So, elle est professeur. We don't say elle est une professeure or un professeur. You don't have to include that word in there. In English, we would say she is a professor. Or I wouldn't say elle est une américaine. I wouldn't say she is an American. I would just say elle est américaine. She is American. So that's just a small detail to notice there. And finally, one last couple of words that are interesting to know is if you need to talk about twins in French, if they're two female twins, then we call them jumelles. And if they're male, they're jumeaux. So just different endings depending on whether they are male or female. Okay, and to summarize all of this, let's take a look at just a few slides with descriptions. Okay, so you remember that we already learned about this expression ce sont. Ce sont mes amis David, Jean, Léa et Lisa. Okay, so c'est David, un jeune homme français. Il est étudiant. Okay, so this is David. Okay, jeune, what does jeune mean? Is he young or is he old? He's definitely a young guy. So jeune refers to young. Un jeune homme français, a young Frenchman, and he's a student. So student is describing who he is, and c'est is just pointing him out. That's who he is. C'est Jean, le frère de David. Okay, frère is the word that refers to brother. So this is David's brother. Il n'est pas étudiant. Il travaille. So you might remember some of these structures from the chapitre préliminaire. Whenever you put ne and pas around a verb, you make it the opposite. So if I say il est étudiant, he is a student. Il n'est pas étudiant, he's not a student. And instead, he works. Okay, we saw travail in the previous chapter. Okay, David et Jean sont français. Ils ne sont pas de Paris, ils sont de Nice. Okay, so they are not from Paris, they are from Nice. And then we have two women here. C'est Léa, une jeune femme américaine. Elle est étudiante. A very similar description to David, except that now we're using some feminine forms. So jeune is the same, whether it's male or female. Américaine, with the E on the end, is the female form. Américain would be referring to a male student. And elle est étudiante. So we're adding an E to the end because she is female. And then c'est Lisa, la sœur jumelle de Léa. Okay, sœur is sister. Notice the O and the E are kind of squished together there. And that's the traditional way to write that word. And that sound, the O and E squished plus the U, just sounds like a. Sœur, la sœur. Jumelle. Do you remember what jumelle means? Okay, as we just learned in la page 34 of the textbook, jumelle is the female word for twin. So they are twin sisters. Elle n'est pas étudiante. Elle travaille. So we have kind of similar situations. One sibling is a student, the other one is not a student but works instead. Okay, so Lisa et Léa ne sont pas françaises. Elles sont américaines. So they're not French, they're Americans. Léa est à Nice pour étudier. Lisa est en France pour voir sa sœur et pour visiter la France. So Lisa, she's American, but she's studying abroad, right? And Léa, her sister, is visiting Nice, or she's in Nice to study. And Lisa is in France to see her sister and to visit France. It's a good opportunity for her. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so a couple of other expressions to know about when you want to describe people. So comment. Remember the expression, the greeting expression we learned before? Comment allez-vous? How are you? The first word in that expression is how. Comment. So comment est David? How is David? What is he like? Describe him. So is he, or il est gros, mince? Okay, so gros refers to somebody who's maybe somewhat overweight. Mince is referring to someone who is thin. And if we look over here at these words, il est timide or il est extraverti. Okay, I think these words are pretty easy to guess just based on English vocabulary. Is he timid? Is he shy? Or is he extroverted? Okay, il est intelligent or il est bête. Okay, so if intelligent, the opposite of that is probably somebody who's not so intelligent. So those are a couple of other words we can use to describe him. Or il est gentil, il est méchant. Okay, so gentil, notice that the L at the end of that word, normally we do pronounce that, like the careful acronym, if you remember that. Often L is pronounced at the end of a word in French, but gentil is a little different. That one is silent. Okay, méchant basically means naughty. I remember once, I think I was in Switzerland or France, seeing a sign on somebody's house that said something like the equivalent of beware of dog in English. And it said something like, watch out for le chien méchant, which would mean the naughty dog. And I thought that was very funny that they used the word méchant to describe a dog that you should watch out for instead of beware. Okay, so finally, David est petit, mince et très gentil. So what could you guess about him? That he's kind of short, petit. He's a little on the smaller framed side. He's mince, and he's très gentil. He's really nice. Okay, and finally, we'll look at one other slide which refers to some female characters this time. So, comment est Léa? What is Léa like? Elle est grosse, elle est mince. So the words are almost the same, the adjectives are almost the same, but the forms are a little bit different. So if we're referring to a male, we would say gros, but to female, it's grosse. Timide, extraverti. Timide stays the same, but extraverti, we're adding an E to the end to make it feminine. Intelligente, bête. Intelligente, we are adding an E to the end when we're talking about a woman. Bête stays the same. Elle est gentille, elle est méchante. Okay, so gentil sounds exactly the same in masculine or feminine form, but we're adding an extra L and E to the end of it. And méchante, we're adding an extra E to make that feminine. Okay, so finally, David et Léa sont célibataires. What do you think célibataire would mean? It's kind of related to the word celibate in English, but in French it simply means somebody who's single. They're not married. Et vous, and you, êtes-vous célibataire? Comme David et Léa. So are you single like David and Léa? Ou alors êtes-vous fiancé, marié, ou divorcé? So basically they're asking, are you single like David and Léa? Or rather, are you engaged, married, or divorced? Say fiancé is a direct borrowing into English. We use the word fiancé all the time. And notice the E, the optional E's on the ends of these words, that simply transforms them to their feminine form, but the pronunciation is the same. So fiancé, marié, ou divorcé. So those E's really matter more for spelling than they do for pronunciation or anything like that. Okay, so those are just some ways of describing people, how they are, what their physical characteristics are like, maybe their personality characteristics, their relationship status, and just a few cultural notes about university life in France, and how we use the forms c'est and ce sont, and il est or elle est. So those are important to be aware of as well. Okay, so that's it for this time. I'll be sending you one more video for this week, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye-bye, à bientôt!